Never thought I'd be the kind of man who'd do what I did. But the moment I heard my daughter's voice through that basement door, small, cracked, like something had already broken inside her, I stopped being the man I thought I was and became something else entirely. My name is Graham Alderton. I drive long-haul freight routes across northern Ontario, Sudbury to Thunder Bay back to Sault Ste. Marie, sometimes all the way down to Windsor if the load's going that direction. It's not glamorous work. 12, sometimes 14 days on the road, then home for a week. The money keeps the lights on, which matters more when you're doing it alone. My ex-wife Pamela and I split 4 years ago, just before our daughter Zoe turned 8. It wasn't ugly, or I didn't think it was at the time. We just ran out of things to keep us together and ran out of patience for pretending otherwise. Zoe stayed primarily with Pamela and Barry. I had her every other weekend and 2 weeks in the summer. It wasn't enough, it's never enough, but it was what the family court order said, and I respected it because I thought respecting it was the right thing to do. Pamela started seeing someone about 1.5 years after the divorce. Guy named Russell Vane. Personal trainer, worked out of a gym in Innisfil. Had one of those social media presences where everything looks curated, healthy meal prep photos, motivational quotes, before and after transformations of clients. The kind of person who makes being well-adjusted look like a full-time job. Pamela seemed lighter when she talked about him. Zoe said he was okay. That was the word she used. Just okay. Not mean, not nice. Just okay. I told myself that was good enough. My run that October was supposed to take me through to the Thursday, flatbed load up to Timmins, then a pickup coming back south to Hamilton. 2 weeks minimum. But the freight company called me Tuesday night, the Hamilton pickup fell through, receiver pushed the delivery back, and there was nothing else going north from Timmins until Friday. My dispatcher told me to deadhead home, rest up, they'd have something new for me by the weekend. I was pulling into Barrie by 7 in the morning on a Wednesday. Zoe was supposed to be at school. I thought I'd drop off a birthday card I'd forgotten to mail. Her birthday had been the week before. I'd been on the road, and maybe leave it in the mailbox with a little gift card for her favorite bookstore on Dunlop Street. I wasn't even planning to knock. But Pamela's car was still in the driveway at 7:15 on a school day. And Russell's car was there too. I almost kept walking. It wasn't my business what time they woke up. But something made me stop, something I can't fully explain even now. A feeling you get sometimes as a parent, like a signal your body picks up before your brain does. I've had it twice in my life. Once when Zoe fell off the back deck when she was 3 and I was already running before I heard the sound. This was the second time. I rang the doorbell, nothing, knocked, nothing, rang again, longer. Russell opened the door in a t-shirt and sweatpants, coffee in hand, looking at me the way you'd look at someone who'd shown up uninvited to your party. "She's at school," he said. Didn't even say my name. Didn't say good morning. Pamela's car is in the driveway. She took the bus in with Zoe, left it for me to take to the shop later. I stood there for a moment. Everything he said was plausible. Nothing about it felt right. "Can I come in? I left something for Zoe in her room last time I visited." "She's not here. Come back on your weekend." He closed the door. I sat in my truck for 20 minutes, called Zoe's cell phone 3 times. It went straight to voicemail each time. Called the school. They said Zoe hadn't checked in yet. I said she should be there by now. The secretary said she'd have someone look into it and call me back. The secretary never called me back. I don't know what made me go around to the back of the house. I've asked myself that question 100 times since then. There was no logical reason. Russell had told me she was at school. Maybe she checked in late. Maybe her phone was dead, but I went anyway. The backyard was small. There was a wooden deck, a barbecue covered in a tarp, a rusted garden shed in the back corner half hidden by an overgrown cedar hedge. The shed wasn't new. It had been there when Pamela bought the house. I'd helped clean it out once the summer before the divorce. Old garden tools, a broken lawnmower, bags of mulch that had turned to powder. I heard her before I saw anything. Not crying. It was past crying. It was this low, rhythmic sound, half humming, half whimpering, like a child who has cried so long she's gone somewhere else in her head. I said her name once. The sound stopped. Then, "Dad?" Not loud, barely audible, like she wasn't sure she was real anymore. The door was held shut with a padlock through a latch that Russell must have installed himself. The screws were newer than the shed, shiny where the wood was gray. I looked around, found a pry bar leaning against the fence. One of those long, flat crowbars used for pulling deck boards. I got it through the latch on the second try and tore the whole thing out of the door frame. The smell came out first. Zoe was in the back corner sitting on an old moving blanket. She was wearing her school clothes for Monday, I know, because they were the same clothes she'd been wearing in a photo Pamela had texted me that morning, which I'd only seen driving up to Timmins and hadn't had time to respond to. The photo was Zoe eating breakfast Monday morning, smiling. She tagged it, ready for the week. At the time, I just thought Pamela was being nice, keeping me updated. Now I understood the photo was before. Zoe's lips were dry and split. There was a bucket in the corner she'd been using as a toilet. There was a water bottle on the floor, empty, and a sleeve of crackers, also empty. Her eyes when she looked at me were this kind of dull, flat thing that I'd never seen in them before and hoped to never see again. I picked her up. She felt lighter than she should have. She didn't say anything for a full minute, just held onto my jacket like she was checking I was solid. Then she said, "I thought you weren't coming until next weekend." I asked her how long she'd been in there. She said since Monday after school. It was Wednesday morning. 42 hours. I carried her inside through the back door, which was unlocked. Russell was in the kitchen when we came through. He turned around from the counter, saw Zoe in my arms, and his face went through about 4 different expressions in 2 seconds before settling on something that was trying to look calm. "She's fine," he said. "She had a tantrum and I gave her some time to cool down." 42 hours, I said. I didn't yell it. I don't know why. I was completely quiet inside, the way you get sometimes when the anger goes past a point where volume doesn't mean anything anymore. That's not accurate. She's exaggerating. Her school called me at 7:30 to say she hadn't checked in. She went in late. Be quiet, I said. I sat Zoe at the kitchen table and got her a glass of water. She drank it in one go and held the glass out without saying anything, and I filled it again. Then I called 911. Pamela came downstairs while I was on the phone. She'd been upstairs the whole time. She stopped on the 3rd stair when she saw Zoe's face, and she didn't move for a long time. When the operator asked me to describe the situation, I described it plainly, and the whole time I was watching Pamela on the stairs, and she was watching Zoe, and she wasn't crying. She looked like someone who had already cried all she could cry, and there was nothing left to do with her face. The OPP arrived in 11 minutes. Paramedics 4 minutes after that. They took Zoe to Royal Victoria Regional Health Center. Moderate dehydration, mild hypothermia. The nights had been cold and the shed wasn't insulated, and what the attending physician quietly described to me in the hallway as acute stress response. She had marks on her knuckles from where she'd hit the door. She'd pulled a nail from the door frame and scratched marks into the wood inside the shed. Not words, just lines. 42 of them, or clothes. She'd lost count somewhere in the middle. Russell was arrested that afternoon. Child abandonment, forcible confinement. The charges sounded serious. They were serious, but then came the bail hearing. His family hired a lawyer from Toronto, one of those criminal defense firms with a glass office tower address and a website that talks about aggressive representation. The lawyer argued Russell had no prior record, was a productive member of his community, owned a business, had roots. The Crown said he was a flight risk given the severity of the charges. The justice of the peace sided somewhere in the middle and set bail at $40,000 with a surety. His parents posted it by 4 o'clock. I sat in the corridor outside the courtroom and watched him walk out in the same clothes he'd been wearing when the police took him. He didn't look at me. His lawyer put a hand on his back and guided him toward the door like a coach walking a player off the field. $40,000. 12 hours in a holding cell. Zoe had 42 marks on the inside of a shed wall. I drove home and sat in my parking lot for an hour without going inside. Zoe was discharged after 2 nights. I had her with me in my apartment. CPS had granted me temporary full custody pending investigation. She slept 12 hours the first night and then lay in my bed watching old episodes of a nature documentary series for most of the following day. She didn't talk much. When she did, it was practical things. She asked if she could call her friend from school. She asked if there was peanut butter. She asked if I'd remember to water the plant in the living room. I had none. She watered it herself, wrapped in a blanket, and then sat back down on the couch. She didn't ask about Russell. She didn't ask about her mother. She just existed in my apartment like she was waiting for the world to steady itself again. Pamela had not been arrested. The detective explained to me that she'd been upstairs when it happened, had consumed a significant amount of wine over the 2 nights, and claimed she'd believed Russell when he told her Zoe had been given some time in the shed for misbehaving and then let back in. She said she hadn't checked herself. She said she'd been afraid of what it meant, that she hadn't checked. The detective told me there was an ongoing investigation into her role and that charges were possible but not certain. Possible, I said. He said yes. I drove home from that meeting and sat in my truck again for a long time. The preliminary hearing came and went. Russell's lawyer was already building a narrative, that it was discipline, misguided discipline, that Russell himself had experienced strict consequences as a child and believed in their effectiveness, that there was no intent to cause harm. First offense, stable employment, a history of community involvement, personal training clients who wrote letters, a pastor who'd known him for 8 years. The Crown told me they had a solid case, told me not to worry. But I'd been watching the Crown's case against people like Russell for long enough on the news, in the papers, to know what solid sometimes meant. Zoe started sessions with a psychologist at a trauma recovery center in Barrie. I sat in the waiting room and listened to the sound of the radiator and read the same magazine article about cottage country renovation projects probably 6 times over the following weeks. She came out of those sessions with red eyes and a specific quietness that was different from her normal quiet. But she kept going back. That counted for something. 3 weeks after the arrest, I found Russell's social media again. He'd gone quiet publicly, but his last post, a motivational quote about adversity building character, posted 2 days before the incident, still had 63 comments of support. People who said he was being targeted, that the story wasn't what the media was making it sound like. One comment said, "The court will sort this out. Stay strong, bro." I closed my phone and walked out to my balcony and stood there in the cold for a long time. I want to be honest about what happened next because I think dishonesty about it would be worse than what I actually did. I spent the next 10 days learning Russell's patterns. Not because I'd decided anything yet. I told myself I just needed to understand. But you tell yourself a lot of things when you're 3 weeks past sleep and your daughter has 42 scratch marks on a shed wall and the man who put her there is back in Innisfil going to the gym. He trained clients Tuesday and Thursday mornings early. He ran a 5K loop through his neighborhood around noon most days, tracked it on an app he hadn't made private. He stopped at the Tim Hortons on Ann Street most afternoons. Double was usually there between 2 and 2:30. He was predictable in the way people are when they've decided they haven't done anything seriously wrong. A friend of mine, I'll call him Pete, owns a small landscaping company out of Cookstown. He'd let me borrow his work van before when I needed to move things. He didn't ask many questions. He lent me the van on a Friday afternoon, and I told him I'd have it back by Monday. I drove to Innisfil on Friday evening and waited. Russell came out of his condo building at 9:45, heading to his car. I got out. He saw me and immediately reached for his phone. "You're not supposed to be near me." That order protects Zoe, not you. I kept my distance, kept my voice flat. "I just want to talk." My lawyer said, "I know what your lawyer said. I want to know why you did it." He looked around. The parking lot was empty. He seemed to calculate something and then relaxed slightly, which told me he still didn't understand what kind of conversation this was. "She was disrespectful," he said. "She talked back. She refused to eat what Pamela made. She called me something I'm not going to repeat. I needed her to understand consequences." For 42 hours. I lost track of time. He said it like it was reasonable. I'm not a monster. I fell asleep. I had things to do. Time got away from me. You lost track of 2 days. He had the expression of a man who thought I was being unreasonable for not accepting his explanation. "Kids need discipline," he said. "The way they're raised now, they've got no resilience. My old man did the same to me when I stepped out of line. I'm fine." There it was. The same thing I'd been trying to understand for 3 weeks. Not a monster who hated children, something almost worse. A man who thought what he was doing was normal, was even good because it had been done to him. I had a taser I'd purchased legally. I'm a long-haul trucker who sometimes makes overnight stops in remote areas, and I've carried one for years. I pulled it out. He started to back away, and then he ran. Not toward the street, but toward the far end of the lot where there was a dumpster enclosure. I caught up with him before he got there. I'm not a large man, but I've been loading and unloading freight for 15 years, and I'm not small either. He went down. I zip-tied his wrists and ankles, got him into the back of Pete's van. He was awake and cursing at me through the tape I'd put over his mouth. I told him to save his energy. There's a storage unit facility out past Barry on the 400, one of those large format ones with drive-up access and 24-hour gates. I had a unit there I'd been using to store things after I downsized my apartment following the divorce, some furniture, hockey gear, a couple of boxes of Zoe's old art projects I couldn't bring myself to throw away. I'd cleared most of it out the week before, moved the boxes to my buddy Pete's garage. What remained was a unit about the size of a walk-in closet, concrete floor, metal walls, no window, industrial lighting on a timer, a ventilation grill near the ceiling. I put a bucket inside, a 2-liter bottle of water, a granola bar, more than Zoe had gotten. I brought Russell inside, removed the tape when I'd secured him to the support post by his wrists. He started yelling. I waited until he stopped. 42 hours, I said. Same as Zoe. You're out of your mind. You will go to prison. Maybe yelling won't change the timeline. The vents at the top circulate air. You won't overheat. It's cold, but you won't freeze. You have water. She had water, he said. I gave her. She had an empty bottle when I found her. He went quiet. I'm going to come back every few hours, I said. And I'm going to tell you exactly what Zoe was doing at that same point, how she was feeling, what she was thinking. I closed the door and padlocked it. Hour 1, when I came back, he was yelling again. I spoke through the ventilation grill. Hour 1, I said. Zoe was crying for her mom. She'd knocked on the door until her knuckles were raw. Hour 6, he was quieter. Asked how long this was going to take. About 36 more hours. Zoe was very cold by hour 6. It was October. You know what October nights are like. Hour 12. He didn't say anything when I spoke through the vent. I heard him shift position on the floor. Hour 12. Zoe started making marks on the wall, scratch marks. She told her therapist she was doing it to keep track. She was afraid she'd lose count and not know how long she'd been there. She was 10 years old and she was keeping count. Hour 18. He said he was sorry. Hour 18. Zoe stopped knocking. She told her therapist she decided nobody was coming and she needed to save her energy. Hour 24. He was crying. Full crying. Not the sound of a man performing emotion for an audience. The sound of a man who had run out of other options. 24 hours. Zoe had drunk all her water. She started rationing her spit. She said in her session that she'd read somewhere that you die faster without water than without food, and she kept thinking about that. Hour 30. His voice was rough. He said he understood. Said he was sorry. Said he had been wrong about everything, and he knew it. Said his dad had been a bastard, and he knew that too. Now, knew it in a way he hadn't known it when it was happening to him. I said, I know. It doesn't mean it wasn't wrong. Hour 36. He barely spoke. I told him Zoe had been making up songs in the shed, humming to herself. Her therapist said she'd been using it to cope, to stay in her body, to not go somewhere she might not come back from. She's 10, I said through the vent. She's been in therapy for 3 weeks, and she still checks every door in my apartment every night before she goes to sleep. Every single door, to make sure it's not locked from the outside. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, what do you want me to do? Tell the truth in court. The whole truth. No plea deal, no minimizing, no I lost track of time. All of it. And if I do, then this stays between us. I had left my phone in the unit from hour 30 onward, voice memo running, tucked under the water bottle where he couldn't see it. By the time I opened the door at hour 42, he had talked for the better part of 2 hours. About everything but the shed at the back of his parents' property in Orangeville where his father had sent him when he misbehaved. About the times it had happened. About what he'd told himself it meant, that it had made him stronger, that it had given him discipline, that it was something children needed. About Zoe specifically, what he'd thought he was accomplishing. About how now, sitting here, he understood that every single part of that story he'd been telling himself was something he'd invented to survive what had happened to him, and he'd never once questioned it. He couldn't stand up when I opened the door. He'd soiled himself. His eyes had that same flat quality I'd seen in Zoe's, that thing that happens when a person has been alone with their fear long enough to stop fighting it. I called for an ambulance from a payphone at a gas station on the 4th Driver. There were still a few. I had to drive a bit to find one, and told them there was a man who needed medical attention at the storage facility. I gave them the unit number. I drove back to Barry and returned Pete's van and told him I owed him dinner. He said, "Everything okay?" I said, "It will be." Russell pleaded guilty to 2 counts of forcible confinement and 1 count of criminal negligence causing bodily harm. No trial, no motions, no character witness parade. His lawyer looked confused at the last hearing. I think Russell hadn't told him what had changed his mind. The Crown accepted the guilty plea. The judge sentenced him to 6 years at Millhaven. Pamela was charged separately with failing to provide the necessaries of life. She pleaded guilty, received a conditional sentence, 18 months served in the community with strict conditions, mandatory counseling, and a prohibition from having unsupervised access to children under 16 for 5 years. She lost residential custody. She also entered a residential treatment program for alcohol dependency in January and has been sober since April. She calls Zoe on Sunday evenings. Zoe talks to her for a while and then hands me back the phone without saying much about it. We're working on that. The police investigated what happened to Russell between the bail hearing and the guilty plea, investigated me specifically. A detective named Arsenault came to my apartment twice, asked me about my whereabouts the weekend in question. I said I'd been home. He looked at me with the expression of a man who'd been doing this for 20 years and knew what kinds of things fathers did and also knew what kinds of things could be proven. He said on his way out the second time, "However it worked out." I said nothing. He didn't come back. The storage unit case made some local news. Mysterious confinement was how one outlet described it before losing interest in the absence of an arrest. Nobody pieced it together publicly. I don't think anyone was really looking that hard. Zoe's case became part of a broader conversation in Ontario about gaps in the mandatory reporting law. A family law advocate named Dr. Miriam Osei testified before a committee in the spring and cited Zoe's case specifically. Zoe's name wasn't used publicly, but I know which case she meant. There's a proposed amendment to the Child, Youth, and Family Services Act that would require any adult who witnesses or has direct knowledge of a confinement situation involving a child to report within 12 hours or face criminal liability. It hasn't passed yet, but it's moving. I'm not telling this story because I think what I did was right. I'm not sure I have the standing to make that determination anymore, not about myself. I'm telling it because Zoe is 11 now, and 3 months ago she started back at her dance class. She'd quit after October, said she didn't feel like it anymore, and I hadn't pushed. She came home from that first class and she was tired, and her hair was a mess, and she smelled like the inside of a gym, and she sat down at the kitchen table and ate an entire bowl of leftover pasta and then said, "I forgot how much I like it." Just that. I forgot how much I like it. I thought about the marks on the shed wall. I thought about the flat look in her eyes when I found her. I thought about her checking the doors at night. She still checks them, but she does it faster now, like it's becoming a habit she's slowly outgrowing. 3 weeks ago, she showed me something she'd written at school. They'd had an assignment, write about a time you were brave. She'd written about the shed, about how she decided to hum to herself so she could stay calm, about how she decided to make the scratch marks so she wouldn't lose count, about how she decided not to stop believing her dad would come. Her teacher had written in the margin, "This took real courage to share. You are braver than you know." I read it twice and then I put it on the fridge. There's a lot I did in October that I can't undo. There are lines I crossed that I live with. My therapist, yes, I have one. I started in November, calls it moral residue. The weight of choices that were necessary in the moment and still cost something permanent. She says the goal isn't to forgive yourself or to condemn yourself, but to understand what happened clearly enough that it doesn't distort everything that comes after. I'm working on that. But some nights, when the apartment is quiet and Zoe is asleep and I can hear the sound of her breathing through the door I've left open, always open, she asked me to leave it open. I think about what it cost to get here. The version of myself I left in that parking lot in Innisfil. The certainty I used to have that there were things I would never do. And then I hear her breathing steady and slow, and I think, she's here. She's getting braver. The doors are open. That's enough. For now, that's enough. I keep thinking about those 42 marks on the wall. Not because they haunt me, though some nights they do, but because of what they mean about the kind of person my daughter already was, at 10 years old, alone in a dark shed in October. She didn't give up. She didn't stop counting. She made herself a system, scratched it into the wood with a nail, and she held on. That takes something that can't be taught in a classroom or handed to a child by a parent. It has to come from somewhere inside them. Zoe had it. I didn't know how much until that morning. What happened to her was the result of choices, a chain of them, each one connected to the last. Russell made his choices, shaped by a father who made the same ones before him, and he never once stopped to ask whether the story he'd been telling himself about discipline and consequences was actually true, or just the only way he knew how to make sense of what had been done to him. Pamela made her choices too, the ones she made and the ones she didn't. The choice to check on her own daughter, to walk downstairs, to ask a single question. Every outcome in the story traces back to a decision someone made or failed to make. That's not a comfortable thing to sit with, but I think it's an honest one. I made choices too. I'm not going to pretend otherwise or dress them up as something cleaner than what they were. What I did in that parking lot in Innisfil and in that storage unit afterward, I knew what it cost, and I did it anyway. I've spent a lot of time with my therapist working through what that means about me. What I've landed on, for now, is this. I acted from the clearest moral understanding I had at that moment, which was that a man who had never genuinely understood what he'd done to my daughter needed to understand it before he could ever be honest in a courtroom. I needed him to know, not for revenge, or not only for revenge, but because I believed, and still believe, that the truth he found in that unit was more real than anything a cross-examination would have produced. Whether that justifies it is a question I'm still living with. What I know for certain is what Zoe showed me. She showed me that resilience isn't something dramatic. It's not a speech or a turning point or a moment of sudden courage. It's scratch marks on a wall. It's counting when you've lost track. It's deciding in the dark to hum a song so you don't disappear into yourself. That's what it actually looks like. Quiet, stubborn, unglamorous survival. And what I know about the situation that put her there is that it persisted because everyone around it chose not to look clearly at what was in front of them, including me in the months before when I noticed something was off and told myself it wasn't my business. Clear thinking matters. Asking the uncomfortable question matters. The moment you stop looking honestly at what's in front of you is the moment something like this becomes possible. Zoe's back at dance. She still checks the doors at night, but faster now. She wrote about the shed for a school assignment and called herself brave, and she was right. I'm still working on what to call myself.